Welcome back everyone to the second episode. I really want to extend a massive thank you to everyone who watched, liked, commented on the last episode. It got a lot of traction and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. And that's probably the biggest thing for me. Seeing a lot of people enjoy this series makes it more enjoyable for me to see that it's not just something that I'm doing for myself. So I want to say thank you very much, and thank you for watching this video as well. I won't prattle along too much because we have quite a lot to get through, especially the results of McCoy's trip to Cuba. So stay tuned for that. During his trip to Cuba, McCoy would strike a deal with Castro, one that meant raw goods from Cuba would be given to the USSR and traded for an equal exchange in value for industrial goods, machinery, fuel, fertilizers, and other processed goods. On top of this trade, there would also be a 100 million ruble loan given to the Cuban government by the Russian Central Bank. And we'll be very familiar with this as we're gonna have to take a loan soon enough. So, welcome back to the Soviet Union. Here we are, back in our little city. It has been named, and we'll talk about that later, but for now, you're going to see me working on this housing block here. The very important part is to put a lot of this housing as close to the center where all the services are, and make sure there's a lot of footpaths and access for people to get around. I did make a crucial mistake in planning this block, though it's not as bad as if it was further away. There should be a path going through the middle of the block, from where the train station is towards the center of town, cutting the block into two equal halves, making it more accessible for people in the center of the block to travel through the city, rather than having to go all the way out to the road and then up. But again, that's not a big problem until we get further out of the city. Especially the fact that this is closer to the highway as well, and I don't plan to build more housing closer to the highway, just for the sake of pollution and just general noise from vehicles going by. Okay, so here you can see I'm doing a bit of management on waste and where the bins are covering. Don't worry about these trees. Most of these aren't going to be final. I'm going to come back to it later. Especially here by the road and in between the pathways. That will get changed later and you'll see that. I wish there was a way to put grass down in some areas because you get a lot of this stony texture. Oh, here's a very important thing. We are naming the city Zhukovgrad, after the general from World War II. This was one of the comments suggested. There was another comment that suggested a really good city name, but that was just before this recording actually, so unfortunately I can't put it in yet. I don't want to waste it on the border town too, it's a really good suggestion, and I love the concept of it. Same as this one actually. So if you do have really good ideas for city names, please do throw them in. The border town, I don't want it to be a too interesting name, so if you've got anything you want to throw away, it's like a silly whatever name, then go ahead. Yeah, still more detailing here, so I'll probably keep talking over the work here. Oh, this here is the most important part. A statue to, is it Georgy Zhukov? I believe it's Georgy Zhukov. Look, I'm not Russian. I can't pronounce Russian things very well, and I know there's Russian people who watch this, so please do not be too offended by my poor pronunciation. I'm trying, I really am. This little gap here is where we're putting a few buildings close to the railway. This might be a bit noisy for people living here, because they are very close to the rail, though the quality of the housing itself is pretty low as well. These will be fairly... It's just to keep the density high. The noise, I don't believe, actually affects people's living standards, as it's not measured in the game, as far as I can tell. Otherwise, I do try to plan things realistically. One thing that is very annoying in the game, you'll probably run into this very often if you do play yourself, you can have issues with intersections. It's always best to just try and keep going at it like I'm doing here. Remove some things, replace some things, go over it again. You can just attempt it many times from different angles, and sometimes it just works out like that. Though, it may not always happen to work out. You'll just have to experiment and see how that goes. So, while I'm just doing some mild decorating, I'll explain something going forward. So, for all of the series, or at least as far as I can foresee, the way episodes will be structured is there'll be parts like this where I'm sort of talking about what I'm doing. Like for instance here, I'm upgrading some of the roads slowly but surely, so that way the construction officers still can have access to them. But I'm also going to break segments based on the months. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see the actual date in game. That's going to be the actual date as well. There's no disconnect there. It's currently April. But I'm going to explain some of the events of April and March as have happened in the rest of the Soviet Union in the world. I will do that in a break coming up very soon. Now, to explain what's going on here with the sewage and whatnot. So we've actually established that this works last episode. This road here that I'm deleting now, that was not needed, or it's not needed anymore. It was there so that we could rebuild and pave the roads going into the sewage area. Now this, because the fire station needs to get rid of trash, it needs bins to be collected. So I put up a simple, quick little bin area and a technical services for the waste trucks to go into. I accidentally put them in a distribution office, and I'm just reassigning them there. And it's just as simple as making all of their access be the border, because we don't have anything else set up. We'll do that much later down the line. Now, on to the break. And at this point in the video, I want to remind everyone watching the video to please like, comment, and subscribe, because especially you people who are watching, 90% of you are not subscribed. That's a very, very large portion. I've not seen that number very high. Please, if you are enjoying this, please subscribe. Alright, anyways, back to the video. Mikoyan would return from Cuba, presenting a mutual deal, where raw resources would come in from Cuba, sugar, hides, furs, and a 100 million ruble loan would be granted to the nation. For exchange, an equal amount of industrial goods would be traded for the raw resources. Finished products like fuel, machinery, vehicles, tractors, and fertilizer. With a steady supply of sugar, raw hides, and leathers, Khrushchev would offer Mikoyan access to one of these streams of incoming raw resources. This will be a crucial industry, the first one that Zhukovgrad will develop. It'll be especially important because it will be the first way for Zhukovgrad and Ural Yug, in a greater context, to be able to pay off loans from the Russian Central Bank. Though how this deal will pay off for the USSR and Cuba is yet to be seen. So stay tuned. So you'll have just seen that we now have a new track builder, and it's currently active and running. It's going to be building the rail between Zhukovgrad and the border town. I might actually rename that border town to just be like to Chelyabinsk, because it would make sense. That's sort of, where you got to go to get there. Other than that, there is a lot to talk about in terms of leathers, sugars. Do we make a food factory? Do we make a clothing factory? I want to leave this up to you guys once again. Do you want Zhukovgrad's first major industry, which will also define kind of how the city is built over time, with industry, what's coming in and out, whether or not we build some sort of food factory, some sort of maybe like a chocolate factory, maybe a candy factory, or it could be, say, a jeans factory, a jacket factory, something like that. And if you can also come up with maybe even a unique brand name for it. I don't think Soviet clothing had brands. I think it was mostly just, you know, built for social purpose. But I do know that there was quite an interesting fashion history, but that's like a whole different video, and I'm probably not the best historian for this sort of thing. And I should probably talk about what's going on screen. I promised I'd do more of that, so I'll get back to that. So, right here, we're trying to make sure that there's water, utilities, like sewage as well, for all of these, I guess this is the northern part of Zhukovgrad, as well as the rail construction office. Because people are going to go work there. And this rail construction office is going to be in operation for a long time, even after we've built all the way to the border. The other things, just with utilities, so making sure there's substations near all of the workplaces and houses, for instance, and also making sure there are switches available, like that one there, and then making sure, of course, it all lines up. I'm just spending a little bit of time to make it all look fancy underground. You don't need to do that, though it is advisable, because keeping this stuff all neat together makes things easier to maneuver around underground. Here, just working on a pump for the sewage, so it gets out of the sewage treatment plant and into the sewage outlet. That's it. Got the word for it. The way sewage works is that, as you can see here, I haven't got it. What you need is, you actually need to consider height, right? The slope needs to always go down. Water is not like that. You can just pump water to wherever you need to go, as long as you have a pump behind something. It just goes out and through. It's as easy as that. But with sewage, you actually need things to go down. Water also can do this as well, like, for instance, water towers. If the water towers are tall enough, they'll just pump water to any buildings that are lower than it on its sort of same grid. I don't know, grid section? Here, just doing more building. I've already planned this stuff out. Yeah, but with utilities, with water, you can pump it, or you can have gravity do the work. That's with water towers. Unless you have like an underwater reservoir, then you definitely need to pump it out. What else is there? Oh, and yeah, just building. Most of the electricity that I use is underground. I prefer it that way. It's harder to mess things up when it's all underground. You don't have to finagle with roads and rails trying to dart in and around your power lines. It's worth it, especially when you're trying to build around cities and urban areas. The power output is reduced, but honestly, I never seem to notice this ever taking effect. It might actually cause us problems, but we can always build more substations. So yeah, we're going to learn soon enough about events and also your choices and how they've affected the world. Because I will say this, despite the fact we've picked the historical option, the way history goes in this is very different than the way history goes in our world. I'll tell you that right now. After this next clip, we're going to talk about how history has changed. That was a nice little time lapse of one of the apartments being built. I'll actually leave you with this and some music so you can just enjoy the time lapse. President Dwight D. Eisenhower of the United States of America is currently facing a low approval rating as the fumbling of negotiations with Cuba has led to a Soviet-aligned puppet state of communists that are now right off the coast of Florida. Eisenhower would try to strangle the Castro government and will now be enforcing a massive embargo on Cuba, taking effect on the 19th of May. This embargo would prevent all US-owned businesses or majority-owned businesses from trading anything but food and medicine to the Caribbean nation. And those trades themselves will be under close scrutiny. This was also put out as a call to all other nations to boycott the dictatorship of Castro in Cuba and the puppet Soviet state. Due to this announcement, Castro will be visiting the Soviet Union to negotiate a reaction to the embargo. Soon enough in June, he'll be meeting with Khrushchev, Mikoyan, and the CPSU members to decide the fate of the future. Yeah, so that's not good. US is escalating tensions in the Caribbean and we gotta deal with it now. Before we get into how we're going to deal with it, I'm just gonna explain a little bit more of Zhukovgrad here. Don't worry, we'll get to it. So, we're doing a lot of building for housing here. The number we're trying to hit is a couple thousand people to start off, but just enough people to be self-sufficient. We've got to have enough people to staff the universities, hospitals, services, etc. And then we can afford to expand further and further. We'll also need to get into research as well, to research better building techniques for construction workers, since a lot of buildings beyond a certain point, in terms of height, require a lot more skill. We're still quite a ways off of people moving into the city. We've still got to have all of the services set up for them, which includes schools, kindergartens, sports facilities, shopping centers, and of course, adequate housing. We do have adequate housing for a few hundred people now, as we do have 3 apartment buildings there, fully built and ready to be housed, or ready to house people. But we don't have a shopping center for people to buy food. We don't have jobs for people to work at. We don't have a university to teach people. We don't have kindergartens to look after children, etc., etc., etc. There are many services that are still lacking. But in terms of lacking services, we can worry about people moving in. It'll probably not happen this year even. Optimistically, it'll be early next year that people will start moving in. I'm not sure exactly, I can't see the future. But based on the time we've been going, people probably take Wait a minute.
What?
Whoa. Okay, pass me. Just start interrupting, I guess. What? Oh, I see. Right. Well, looks like we've got people in the city now. They shouldn't be here, though. Anyways, so ignore that. Those people I accidentally messed up. So there's a mechanic in the game where when you're building an apartment building or any housing building, there is a little tick that says get citizens. You can buy citizens from other parts of the world, right? Which sounds weird and strange. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. That I accidentally left on. Just make sure every time you're constructing anything, just turn that off. Turn that off. Also, to make sure that the current construction work on the rails and future construction is more smooth, consistent, and in order to do that, I need a few construction materials to be in ready supply. Gravel is almost always used for most constructions, and that's the same here with rail. Also steel, wood, and occasionally bricks, I believe, but those will all go in a separate open storage, which you'll see me placing now. Now, Castro is coming to the USSR. We need to have a meeting with him and talk about Cuba's response and the USSR's response to the economic sanctions on Cuba. This is not the biggest talking point anymore, however. Our agents in the USA have told us that Eisenhower plans to use the upcoming UN meeting in September to try to pass a regulatory body to examine the cargo on board Soviet trade ships. Now, this has been done before, or at least it's been attempted before. 3 years ago in 1957, the US and Eisenhower's government tried to do the same thing with the UN with the space race, trying to disguise a science team that wanted to steal the Soviet secrets of rocketry by making sure we weren't putting nukes in space. This was rejected, of course, and the actual signing of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction in space hasn't been signed yet. What they're trying to do now is trying to see what we've got going into Cuba and what's coming out of Cuba. They want to make sure we haven't got any military weapons going into Cuba. The funny thing is, we don't. We aren't trading any weapons of mass destruction. Despite the fact that Eisenhower has no way of knowing, he still believes, and in fact claims with utmost certainty, that the USSR is using this trade route to put nukes in Cuba and aim them right on America's doorstep, and is rousing the country up into a fervor about this. Now, this is quite discerning, since a lot of American people want blood, because we so happen to just want to trade for some sugar. So for the upcoming September UN meeting, we need to figure out what we're going to do with this proposal. We've got 4 options that we've narrowed down from various party members' suggestions. Firstly, we could just accept the UN proposal, and by just accepting this, open ourselves up to criticism and transparency on the world stage, gain some concessions, because after all, we aren't sending any weapons. That's not something we're trying to hide. We aren't sending weapons. That's what we've said we're doing, and we're not sending weapons. This could embarrass Eisenhower and the Republican Party, and could lead to the Democrats winning the next election after this meeting. The Democrats currently have John F. Kennedy running for president, while the Republicans have Vice President Richard Nixon running for presidency. So that's another thing to consider. Second option, we could just reject it and point out the obvious ploy that it is, trying to spy on us. It's not really the US's business what we're trading. After all, they're the ones that put the sanctions up, not us. Thirdly, we could counter this proposal with one of our own, with a regulatory body that's also in charge of looking at the shipping routes and trade within Vietnam. The Vietnamese War is currently on, and the US is putting a lot of materials into Vietnam. We could use this information to help the North Vietnamese win the war. We could also use this to figure out how much weaponry the US is expending into Vietnam. And finally, we could try and trick the US by accepting this deal, but also, on all of our further shipments, place fake advanced weapons to trick the US into stealing these weapons and wasting their time spending all of these resources, manpower, and money trying to reverse engineer fake weaponry. Now, as always, please comment down below what you want to see happen. If you can think of other ideas that you might want to see, put that down as well. The most liked comment revolving around this issue will be the choice we take. If there's a tie, I'll take the second most for each. Now, as well, I'll inform everyone that within 3 days of uploading the video, that's when I'll call it, roughly. So, if it's roughly 3 days after, still try and put in, likes and comments and whatnot. But if it's been 3 days, it's probably too late. I'll have probably picked by then. So, don't be disheartened, just, there's always another episode. And I do take recommendations as well. Your comments do fuel the story after all. So, now I'm going to try and explain a bit as I'm going along, and I know I haven't been doing too well of a job of that. I'm going to keep trying to do more and more of it as I go along. I know a few of the viewers are trying to play along and trying to build their own cities as well. I apologize if I haven't been able to explain it very well. Right now is, cinematics and a couple of simple things. This here, I wouldn't recommend doing this very often, only in select cases, where you're building a lot of tiny little segments of road. I would not recommend doing that, especially when going to a building like a shopping center. The only reason I'm doing it there, and the exception to the rule, is in cases where you haven't built something yet, or you're not too bothered about things not being reached in any time soon, or you have an alternate way of accessing that construction site. That shopping center earlier had a bunch of, paths that hadn't been built over yet. Places that the construction sites can still access, so just remember that if you're ever going to do little segments like that, always give alternative ways for your construction crew to get there. If you can't, then you better hope, or you better make sure that you don't need those built anytime soon, because that's going to take a long time to build. Each individual piece of road has to be built before the next, right? And if you're doing it in little segments, and you're doing it straight from dirt to asphalt, that means it has to get paved over with gravel first before it even gets paved over with asphalt, then it has to get rolled over and flattened. That's 3 separate processes, requiring 3 different kinds of machines and 3 different kinds of materials. Sorry, only 2 kinds, so you don't need any materials for rolling. Yeah. So, now, doing this with paths, right, is even worse, right? But you're gonna have to do this, especially with access to buildings. So always build the paths after the apartments are done, then do them in piecemeal, do bit by bit as the construction is going along. Don't let anyone live in those buildings like I accidentally did. Do not do that. They will lose access to the entire city, and they will get angry, there'll be dissent, loyalty will drop, happiness will drop, healthcare will drop, etc. Only bad things will happen from there, right? So here, for instance, I'm just sort of painting all these paths before I forget to. I forgot this. A pro tip is, when you're doing stuff like upgrading, hold shift and move your mouse across, right? Left click and drag. It creates a box which you can mass upgrade stuff with. I keep forgetting to do that. You should definitely do that. Now, you're gonna come to points where, just like here, there's not a lot to do. You've already planned everything out. You just have to wait for everything to get built. Don't worry, you're not doing anything wrong. Realistic difficulty means you're gonna have to wait for things to happen. You can keep planning and planning, but the game only goes so fast. Also, another pro tip, don't use it very often though. If you're on 2 times speed, hold control and then 1, 2, or 3 on the numpad. That will actually accelerate time like this. Don't do it though, because it accelerates the simulation, which I've heard, has difficulty, especially with people around. Do it when you haven't got people around, when you're just starting up. Now, for waste, you can just sort of throw them around everywhere. There's a mod on the workshop that's really good. Oh, hold on. Bang. Perfect. That. The centerpiece of our city, the monument to Georgy Zhukov. That's very important to point out. So yeah, if you are building a city, I forget what I was saying. It was about building a city, yada yada yada. Yeah, if you're just starting out, you can use the time warping, where you go extremely fast. I wouldn't recommend doing it when you have people in the city, unless you're confident that everyone is able to meet all of their needs. Alright, here we go. Yeah, more buildings being set up. Also, a little pro tip as well. The assign tool. So the office assign tool, that's a whole thing. I probably don't have enough time to explain it. I've got a minute. And I don't have the menu up anyways. Actually, I'll bring the menu up. So, there is a construction office assign tool. You can assign multiple offices into a group. And then there's another tool you can use that will allow you to assign constructions to them. When you're on that tool, there's 3 or 4 different states a building site can be in. There's yellow, right? A yellow ghost, that means it's planned and ready to be built. Oh, here's some cinematics as well to look at. Nighttime cinematics, beautiful stuff. It's awesome, amazing. But anyways, so yellow is when there's a construction site, it's been unassigned. If it goes red, that means you can't access it from the construction site. So that'll probably mean that there's roads that are not connected to it somewhere along the route. If you, for instance, have it a sort of dark green, that's a very dark green, that means only some of the buildings are assigned to it. Fully like bright green, all offices are assigned to it. Okay. I'll just leave you with the time lapses. Thank you so much for watching. This is the end. There's probably a whole bunch of stuff on the screen. You know, subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff. And hopefully this goes up either Australian Friday or Saturday. Until next time, have a good one.